April 18, 1944. 2:17 a.m. Ypsilanti, Michigan. The night sky above the massive Willow Run bomber plant glowed orange like a city on fire. Floodlights stabbed through cold spring fog, while smoke rolled from towering exhaust stacks into the darkness. The sound hit first, a deafening wall of noise. Rivet guns hammering steel, hydraulic presses slamming into aluminum sheets, conveyor chains rattling endlessly through the factory like giant mechanical snakes. Somewhere deep inside the building, thousands of boots moved in synchronized waves across concrete floors slick with oil and rainwater dragged in from outside. Then the siren sounded, shift change, and suddenly the parking lots exploded with motion. Women in heavy denim jackets climbed from buses, carrying metal lunch pails against their hips. Men too old for military service hurried through the gates beside teenagers who had lied about their age just to work here. Faces looked exhausted under the harsh white floodlights. Some had only slept 3 hours, some not at all, but overhead, hanging from giant steel cranes inside the factory, were the reasons they kept coming back bombers, hundreds of them. Half-finished B-24 Liberator aircraft stretched across the enormous production floor like the skeletons of giant metal whales. Fuselages rolled slowly down assembly tracks. Detached wings hung suspended in midair by cranes thicker than tree trunks. Workers swarmed over unfinished bombers carrying drills, welding torches, rivet guns, blueprints, oxygen tanks, and coils of electrical wiring. The factory smelled of hot aluminum, machine grease, sweat, and cigarette smoke. And somewhere inside that roaring industrial monster was 23-year-old Rose, Monroe. She adjusted the red bandana around her dark hair and stepped onto the moving assembly platform with a pneumatic rivet gun hanging from her shoulder. The machine was nearly as heavy as a child around her. Dozens of women climbed ladders into the hollow body of another unfinished bomber, while supervisors shouted over the thunder of machinery, "Keep it moving." No sections falling behind. Rose looked up above her. The bomber seemed endless, more than 60 feet of aluminum, and steel towered over the factory floor under blinding industrial lights. The aircraft was ugly, brutal, built purely for war. 4 massive Pratt and Whitney engines, twin tail fins, enough bomb capacity to flatten entire city blocks. And Germany feared them, not just because of the destruction they caused, but because America was building them faster than anyone thought possible. At the beginning of the war, military experts believed heavy bombers required careful handcrafting by highly trained specialists. It took months to assemble one aircraft, sometimes longer. European factories relied on experienced craftsmen moving slowly through complex production stages. Willow Run changed everything. Henry Ford's engineers had taken the logic of automobile assembly lines and unleashed it onto aviation production. Instead of building bombers piece by piece in isolated workshops, aircraft moved continuously across miles of conveyor systems, while thousands of workers handled tiny sections of the process simultaneously. It sounded impossible. At first, many military officials thought it was impossible. Even some American officers laughed at the idea that ordinary civilians, especially inexperienced women, could mass produce one of the most complicated war machines on Earth. Then the bombers started rolling out, faster and faster and faster. By 1944, Willow Run was producing nearly one Liberator every single hour. German intelligence officers reading production reports in Berlin reportedly believed the numbers had to be propaganda. No country could build heavy bombers that quickly, not while also building tanks, ships, trucks, ammunition, engines, and fighters across 2 oceans of war. But the reports kept coming, every day, every week, every month. The impossible numbers were real. Inside the plant, however, there was nothing glamorous about it. Workers developed chronic coughs from inhaling aluminum dust. Fingers split open from handling sharp metal panels. Rivet guns shook arms numb after 12-hour shifts. In winter, freezing air swept through giant loading doors. In summer, temperatures inside the factory became suffocating under thousands of industrial lamps and roaring engines being tested indoors. And still, they came back. Because while these civilians worked under floodlights in Michigan, American bomber crews were dying over Europe. Far away across the Atlantic, young airmen climbed into these very aircraft, knowing many would never return. Every bomber lost over Germany meant another crew burned alive in the sky. Another group parachuting into enemy territory. Another telegram arriving at a mother's front door. The workers at Willow Run understood that every rivet mattered, every fuel line mattered, every loose bolt could kill someone at 20,000 feet. Rose knew it too. One night during a short break, she climbed onto a catwalk overlooking the massive factory floor and stared across the endless sea of machinery below. Thousands of workers moved beneath her under white industrial lights, while unfinished bombers crept slowly along the assembly lines like giant creatures being born from steel and noise. You could barely see the far end of the building through the haze. The place felt infinite. Then someone pointed upward. At first, Rose thought it was rain hitting the roof. But it wasn't rain. It was the sound of engines deep, heavy, rhythmic. Workers across the factory slowly stopped what they were doing. Some removed gloves. Others climbed ladders for a better view through the upper windows. Then the formation appeared overhead. Damaged American bombers returning from Europe, even from Michigan. The sight silenced the factory. Several aircraft limped through the clouds trailing smoke. One Liberator had holes ripped through its wing large enough to see daylight through the metal. Another struggled to maintain altitude, engines coughing black smoke into the night sky. Those planes had survived Germany barely. And suddenly, the workers inside Willow Run understood something terrifying. No matter how fast they built bombers, the war was destroying them even faster. The next morning began before sunrise. Rain hammered against the factory windows, while long columns of workers pushed through the gates beneath dim yellow lamps. Mud covered the parking lots. Bus tires sprayed dirty water onto crowds wrapped in heavy coats as whistles echoed across the enormous industrial complex. Inside Willow Run, the assembly lines were already moving. They never truly stopped, not for weather, not for exhaustion, not even for death. Rose tightened her gloves while stepping onto platform 42 beside the unfinished fuselage of another B-24 Liberator. The aluminum skin felt freezing cold against her fingers. Around her, workers climbed ladders carrying rivet guns and tool belts, while foremen screamed production numbers over loudspeakers. 247 aircraft this month. We fall behind now. Boys die over Europe later. Nobody answered, because everyone inside the factory already knew it was true. Far across the Atlantic, American bomber crews were fighting a brutal air war over Nazi Germany. Every daylight raid meant running a gauntlet of anti-aircraft fire, searchlights, and German fighters tearing through bomber formations at high altitude. Casualty rates were horrifying. Entire crews vanished in minutes. And every time one of those bombers exploded over Europe, Willow Run had to replace it, fast. That pressure consumed the factory. You could feel it in the speed people walked, in the constant shouting, in the exhaustion hanging beneath workers' eyes. Most of the women there had never worked industrial jobs before the war. Some had been waitresses, teachers, housewives, telephone operators, farm girls. Now they carried pneumatic drills, crawled through fuel tanks, wired bomb bays, mounted machine guns, and inspected engines powerful enough to shake entire buildings when tested. At first, many male supervisors doubted them. Some openly mocked them. They will quit in a week. They cannot handle the machinery. They are too slow. But the war did not care about old opinions. The men who once filled factories were dying in Tunisia, Italy, and the Pacific. America needed workers immediately. So women stepped into the empty spaces beside the machines, and slowly, the impossible began happening. The women learned faster than anyone expected. Rose became one of the best riveters in her section. Others mastered hydraulic systems, electrical wiring, navigation equipment, engine calibration, and structural assembly. Many worked 12-hour shifts, 6 or even 7 days a week. Some collapsed from exhaustion. Others kept photographs of husbands or brothers fighting overseas, tucked into their lockers beside cigarettes and pay stubs. Every bomber became personal. The noise inside the plant was relentless. Rivet guns cracked like machine gun fire. Steel cranes groaned overhead, carrying entire wing sections through clouds of steam and welding sparks. Conveyor belts rattled endlessly beneath fluorescent lights, while engines roared during testing runs near the far side of the complex. You could not escape the sound. Workers often returned home, unable to hear properly for hours. Yet the real pressure came from above. Production numbers. Always production numbers. Ford executives and Army Air Forces officers demanded more bombers every month. Delays were treated almost like battlefield failures. Charts covering factory walls tracked hourly progress in giant black letters. Everything was measured. Every second mattered. And the story of Willow Run was only beginning. Months later, the invasion of Europe would begin. D-Day would shake the world. Allied bombers would darken the skies over France and Germany. Entire German cities would burn beneath waves of explosives, while the Luftwaffe struggled desperately to stop formations that seemed endless. And behind those formations stood the workers, the welders, the inspectors, the mechanics, the women carrying rivet guns beneath giant factory lights. Inside Germany, intelligence officers tried calculating the numbers repeatedly. One B-24 every hour, sometimes faster. Entire bomber groups destroyed over Germany seemed to reappear weeks later, fully rebuilt with replacement aircraft and fresh crews again and again and again. Some German commanders began privately admitting the truth. The Reich was losing an industrial war it could never win, because America had discovered something revolutionary: war production itself could become a weapon. At Willow Run, workers felt the weight of that realization every day. They watched rows of completed bombers taxi across the airfield beneath sunset skis, while engines thundered loud enough to shake the ground beneath their boots. Freshly built, freshly armed, freshly sent toward war. And somewhere over Europe, young crews barely older than Rose would soon fly those aircraft through anti-aircraft fire, exploding flak, and swarms of enemy fighters. Some would survive, others would never come home. That was the cruel reality hidden beneath the patriotic posters and smiling photographs. These bombers were not symbols over Europe. They were instruments of destruction. Factories burned beneath them, railways shattered, cities collapsed under firestorms. And the workers at Willow Run were helping make it possible on a scale the world had never seen before. By late 1944, the Allied strategic bombing campaign had reached unprecedented scale. Entire German cities were attacked repeatedly by formations numbering over 1,000 bombers. Oil refineries exploded into pillars of black smoke visible for miles. Rail systems collapsed beneath constant bombardment. Fighter factories disappeared beneath rubble, and every major operation required replacement aircraft. Willow Run became obsessed with efficiency. Managers shaved seconds from assembly procedures wherever possible. Workers practiced repetitive motions until they became instinctive. Tiny adjustments multiplied across thousands of workers, and suddenly entire bombers appeared faster. The factory transformed ordinary people into specialists through sheer repetition. Industrial accidents happened constantly. Workers lost fingers inside hydraulic equipment. Others suffered burns from welding arcs or collapsed from fatigue during overnight shifts. Ambulance sirens occasionally echoed through the building, while production somehow continued around the emergencies. The bombers could not stop. One evening near midnight, Rose crossed an elevated walkway overlooking the final assembly area and froze. Below her sat nearly 24 completed B-24 Liberators waiting for delivery. 24 massive bombers, finished, ready for war. Their polished aluminum skins reflected the factory lights like silver mirrors stretching into the distance. For a moment, the factory became strangely quiet in her mind, because suddenly the scale became real. Each aircraft carried a crew of 10 men, pilots, bombardiers, navigators, engineers, gunners, radio operators, 10 human beings inside every bomber. And below those bombers, tens of thousands of civilians worked endless shifts to keep them flying. You could almost feel the invisible connection stretching across the Atlantic between factory workers in Michigan and air crews dying over Europe. Then came the reports from Germany. Fuel shortages crippled German pilot training. Replacement aircraft arrived too slowly. Experienced aviators vanished faster than they could be replaced. The balance was collapsing, not because Germany lacked courage, not because German engineers lacked skill, but because America had weaponized mass production itself. By winter, Willow Run workers developed strange routines to survive the pace. Some slept inside parked cars between shifts. Others carried spare uniforms because oil and sweat soaked through clothing so quickly. Coffee consumption became legendary. Then one morning, everything changed. The factory loudspeakers ordered an immediate halt to several assembly sections. Workers looked up in confusion. That almost never happened. Rumors spread rapidly through the building. Sabotage. Someone claimed a worker had been caught tampering with aircraft components. Another said federal investigators were already inside the plant. Nobody knew the full truth yet. But for the first time, fear moved through Willow Run itself. Not fear of production quotas, not fear of exhaustion, fear that the enemy might already be inside the factory. Meanwhile, across Europe, the Battle of the Bulge erupted through the frozen Ardennes forest. German forces launched one final desperate offensive, fueled partly by the hope that Allied momentum could still be shattered. But Germany was running out of time, running out of fuel, running out of pilots, running out of factories. And Allied bombers had played a massive role in causing it. Suddenly, everyone inside Willow Run understood why their work mattered more than ever. The bombers they built were strangling Germany's ability to continue the war, destroying oil production, destroying railways, destroying industry itself. That realization changed something inside the factory. The exhaustion remained, the injuries remained. But now the workers could see the direct connection between their assembly lines and the battlefield headlines arriving from Europe. One bomber built in Michigan could help destroy a fuel refinery in Germany. One destroyed refinery could ground enemy tanks and fighters. One grounded fighter squadron meant fewer American crews dying over Europe. By early 1945, the skies above Germany looked unnatural. Thousands of aircraft engines vibrated through the clouds, while endless Allied bomber streams crossed Europe under escort fighters glinting silver in the winter sun. Hamburg, Dresden, Berlin, Cologne, industrial districts collapsed beneath explosions powerful enough to shake concrete bunkers underground. And somewhere inside many of those formations were B-24 Liberators built at Willow Run, back in Michigan. Workers followed reports obsessively. Newspapers arrived carrying aerial photographs of devastated German factories, while radio broadcasts described the collapsing Luftwaffe and the growing fuel crisis crippling the Reich. Yet inside Willow Run, there was little celebration, only exhaustion. By now many workers had spent years living inside the rhythm of wartime production. 12-hour shifts blurred together until days lost meaning. But every morning they returned because the bombers kept leaving, and the war still was not over. Then came April 1945. Germany was collapsing. American soldiers advancing through shattered cities encountered burned factories, destroyed rail yards, abandoned tanks, and civilians wandering through streets buried under rubble. And deep inside captured German offices, Allied intelligence officers discovered something fascinating: production reports, intercepted estimates, desperate calculations. German planners had spent years trying to understand how the United States produced war machines at such impossible scale. The numbers horrified them: aircraft, ships, trucks, engines, bombs, fuel. Germany simply could not match it. Factories like Willow Run represented something entirely new in human warfare. Industrialized mass production turned into strategic dominance. Not one superweapon, not one genius commander. Millions of ordinary civilians working continuously behind the front lines. That was the true power Germany failed to stop. Then, less than a month later, the announcement arrived: Germany had surrendered. V-Day. The reaction inside Willow Run exploded. Workers screamed, cried, hugged strangers. Some climbed onto unfinished aircraft, waving American flags, while factory sirens blasted across the massive complex. But beneath the celebration lived another realization: the endless bombers